right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, back with another top five. If you haven't checked out the top five favorite Mopars, go ahead and give that a click real quick. Today, we are here with the top five favorite Chevys of all time. Now, as a brand loyal Mopar guy, lists like this are always tough, and they're going to get tougher as we, venture out of the muscle car. At least Fords and Chevys are in my wheelhouse, and they're something that I have a lot of respect for, even though I can't stand them half the time. But we're gonna get at it. Top five favorite Chevys of all time. Coming in at number five, we have the car that started the rivalry of all rivalries. The first gen 1967 to 1969 Chevrolet Camaro SS. This thing came with a 396 cubic inch V8, 325 to 375 horsepower, 410 to 415 pound-feet of torque. This thing was it back in the day. I mean, this thing, aside from the Mustang, I'm a Mopar guy, and I'll openly admit that Mopars didn't get their due until much later in the company's history. Those Mopars, they caught on much later after, the muscle car wars had ended and everything. But this right here, this was the car that everybody wanted. If you weren't a Mustang guy, you were a Camaro guy, man. And these things had the looks. They had everything. They had the power in that small package. I mean, they gave the Mustang a run for their money, and there were a lot of applications of the Camaro where it just dogged on Mustangs all day long. It is what it is, man. The Chevys were king for much of the 60s. There's no denying that. Coming in at number four, we had the third gen C3 1968 to 1970 Chevrolet Corvette. More specifically, for the purposes of this list, the very extremely limited run of the ZL1. There are only two documented ZL1s in existence. This thing came with a all aluminum block 427 cubic inch V8. It was actually the sister motor to the L88. It had 430 horsepower, 450 pound-feet of torque. Despite the factory numbers by Chevy being what they were, whispers around, car circles were that the horsepower number was actually closer to 560 horsepower. I mean, this thing, for the time, it was getting a 0 to 60 time of 4 seconds flat. It had a quarter mile time under 11 seconds. For the era, that's blazing fast. That's stupid fast. That's stupid fast for a lot of modern cars, let alone back in that day. I mean, this thing, I know all car guys that aren't Chevy guys like to give Corvette owners a hard time, but push comes to shove, most people can admit deep down in their heart there's a special place for the Corvette, because the Corvette, it does what it does, and it does it well. It kills the track. Without the advent of the Corvette, we wouldn't have had the Ford GTs, we wouldn't have had the Vipers, we wouldn't have had a lot of the badass track cars that really spawned from a necessity of trying to kick the crap out of the Corvette. And a lot of them may have hung in there, but man, the Corvette has had the staying power. The Corvette has had the numbers to keep pushing through. Even when the Camaro didn't survive, the Corvette endured. Kudos to the Corvette. Badass car. Coming in at number three, you knew I had to have at least one of these on here. The Chevrolet C10. I mean, gotta have a truck on here somewhere. My personal preference, the second gen 1968 to 1970, came with a 396 cubic inch V8, 325 horsepower, 410 pound-feet of torque. Flat out, this thing just exudes cool. It just exudes badass. It's just dripping with awesomeness. I mean, this thing, they sounded great. They performed great. These things were the definition of a muscle truck back in the day. And quite frankly, completely honestly, this is probably the best looking truck that Chevy has ever put out, in my personal opinion. There's been some decent looking trucks, and honestly, I think Chevy trucks are usually among the worst looking trucks, at least in the last 20 years or so. But man, this thing, honestly, I think it looks better than a lot of the Mopar trucks from the same era. So kudos. I mean, Chevy hit the thing out of the park with that one. For me to admit that, they hit it out of the park. Coming in at number 2, the Chevrolet Corvette, specifically the ZR1, the 7th gen C7. To me, this was the last good-looking Corvette that has been made. I know it was the last gen, but this thing came 6.2 liter supercharged V8, 755 horsepower, 715 pound-feet of torque. You know, a lot of people are going to be surprised. Oh, why didn't you pick the brand new one? Why didn't you pick the mid-engine? I'm a purist, man. For me, the thing that set the Corvette apart from all the other European and foreign performance cars that this thing was trying to overtake, the thing that made this thing special was it was still a raw V8 sports car, rear-wheel drive, nasty. And that was the one thing that I preferred about the Corvette over the Viper, though I'm a Mopar guy. I'll take the Viper all day. I loved that they stayed true to the old V8, just nasty muscle slash sports style car. It's the one thing that I always felt like the Viper was lacking, was big V8 power. I know the V10's badass, but this thing, it was the last special Corvette as far as I'm concerned. I felt like this was the best looking Corvette, and I like a lot of the classic Corvettes. And as far as style, to me, this is the best looking, most efficiently performing Corvette combination out of any of the Corvettes. And for me, the brand new Corvette, they took way too many styling cues from European cars, and yet maybe the changes that they made did increase the performance, and it did make it a better performing car on the track. But everything that it gained, I think it lost just as much, and it lost what made it special. This thing was in my opinion, all things considered on the car, this was the last badass Corvette that was made. I think Chevy screwed the pooch on this one, and I think it was a misstep, in my personal opinion. And finally, here we are, number 1. This should surprise no one. The 2nd gen 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS. I told y'all I'm a big B-body Mopar guy. It shouldn't surprise you that my favorite Chevy of all time fits in the same ballpark. This thing had a 454 cubic inch V8, 450 horsepower, 500 pound-feet of torque. This thing was badass, flat out. The Corvette may be faster, the Camaro may be faster in certain applications, but this thing just exudes, it just pours badassery from just front to back. It had the Coke bottle design, it had the sharp edges, the things that just made a muscle car. And honestly, prior to the redesign for the Chevelle, I didn't particularly care for the Malibu body style on the Chevelle. Once they switched this thing up, this thing just screams badass, and you cannot deny this thing is mean, it is bad, it is fast, it is loud, it is sick. This, if I was going to break down and buy a Chevy, which I almost did, this exact car, this would be it. Number 1, zero doubt. Chevy Chevelle, one of the baddest cars Chevy has ever made. And there we have it, guys. Top 5 favorite Chevys of all time. Sit tight, because the top 5 favorite Fords is coming. I know a lot of people are going to be groaning and rolling their eyes, but we can't leave one of the big 3 out. So, till then, catch you on the next one.